noticed. So first of all, thanks to you all, thanks to Enrico, Zucchi, Alessandro, Metlica, and all the risk team for organizing this. Thanks to you all for coming. And as you might have noticed, this is actually the first time I give a presentation on Zoom. So yeah, I hope things will go better from now on. I will speak about a topic which has often been referred to in literature and also in the same conference on the very first day, but which has not often been investigated in depth. Already in the 1970s, in his famous classical book about the Republic of Genoa, Claudio Costantini famously referred to a modello olandese, that's called Dutch model, which would have been important for the people who involved in naval and commercial reforms in Genoa in the middle of the 17th century. Similar references appear also in many other works of history, and not just there, also many sources. Probably also many of you in the sources you have used yourselves have seen references to the Netherlands as an example to copy, admire, or disapprove. Of course, the fascination with the Netherlands is in no way limited to Genoa. After all, the period we're speaking about, the middle of the 17th century, is the high point of economic and military success of the Dutch Republic, and throughout Europe, people looked and described it, and again, this is something on which the risk network itself has dealt with about the representation of the Dutch Republic. However, what I want to stress is that not everybody noticed or admired the same things in the Netherlands. Because actually the identification of a model is largely driven by the expectations of the people who build it. To put it another way, the way Genoese people looked at the Dutch Republic depended on and reflected what people were concerned about in Genoa. And of course, that's the same thing when Swiss people or English people looked at the Dutch Republic. In this presentation, I will first revise the preconditions of this model and then see how it was developed among the Genoese Republicisti. The image of the Dutch Republic among Genoese intellectuals has actually already been investigated for a slightly different period, for a previous period. Some scholars, such as Raffaele Belvedere, Kass-Reiner, and some others, have looked at how Italian and Genoese history writers described the Dutch revolt between the 16th and the 17th century. Let me summarize here the main results of this line of literature. Even though the Genoese had a clear pro-Catholic bias, they could still appreciate, to a certain extent, the Dutch rebels, especially if they had themselves reasons to mistrust the Spanish. The description of the events of the Dutch revolt could then become a tool in the internal political debate of Genoa, which centered on the extent of the alliance with Spain and on the advantages and drawbacks that it offered. My aim is to dwell on these conclusions and to see what happened in the period afterwards. I don't want just to look at what intellectuals wrote, but also to consider the wider context and what was going on in Genoa at the time. Because in the first part of the 17th century, the Dutch were not just the actors of a faraway war, but they also had a role within the economy of the city of Genoa itself. There was a Dutch-speaking community, but at the time, quite solid, formed of people from both the southern and the northern Netherlands, and there was a lot of shifting identities at the time between these two entities, composed of merchants, around 20-25 people at any given time, which is not such a small community. I mean, it's just a little less than the Dutch-speaking community of Venice, to put it into perspective. And of course, artisans, artists, and so on. The Genoese usually lump them all together under the symbol of fiamminghi. And then, of course, the Dutch ships coming from the northern Netherlands, which bring grain and or other raw materials from northern Europe, and then also sell their freights to Genoese merchants, who can use them as ships also when they do their own traffics. Their importance was perfectly understood and appreciated by the famous Republicista Andrea Spinola, who actually devotes one of his ricordi to the Flemish ships. So Spinola, as a Republicist, of course, wished that the members of the ruling class engaged more in trade. And from his perspective, the Dutch were welcome. he sees them as providers of grain, whose presence is extremely helpful. As he says in this recording, the grain which is carried on the Dutch ships don't just supply our own city, but also our own territory, the Riviera, which otherwise in the last years would have had a hard time. And in some parts of Italy, you would similarly have had a lot of hunger, were it not for the grain got by the Dutch ships. And this way, our own state, which by its own would not be able to grow a lot of food, and would actually used to needed to import it, now is actually able to re-export it to our neighbors. So the Dutch presence is actually an opportunity for Genoese trade. And such is their importance that Spinola, besides supporting the Porto Franco and all the port regulations that could support the presence of foreign ships, even goes as far as suggesting to give little presents, such as a couple of bottles of wine when the Dutch ships arrive. Spinola was also personally sympathetic to northern sailors and merchants. And in another record, for example, he praises a German merchant, Christopher Furtenbach, in a time in which the German and the Flemish communities were not clearly detached. Spinola wrote during the 1620s. Even though he admired and appreciated the Dutch, he did not go as far as saying that the Genoese should imitate them. And for example, he noticed the success of the Dutch trading companies, but he said that the Genoese were not trustworthy enough to be able to do something similar. And so, for example, this is another record in which he speaks about the joint stock companies, saying that the Dutch did this kind of companies. As far as I know, they still have it. They make a lot of profits. But this is something that I mentioned not in order to carry it out, because I know that where there's no moral goodness, when there's no virtue, where there's no goodness, these kinds of businesses cannot be established. Now, this is consistent with the Spinola's views, which in the end were quite conservative and pessimistic. He did not think that Genoa could or should ever really become a significant military power of its own, and in the end was satisfied with carving a slightly more autonomous role within the Habsburg political system. However, later thinkers were definitely more ambitious and naive, as we will see. So, as you all know, in the following decades, the political landscape changed a lot. From the 1630s on, a series of events contributed to the growth of the Republicanismo. First of all, of course, the restructuring of Spanish royal debt, which made Spain a much less safe place to make business with, but also the deteriorating military situation, which meant that Spain could no longer provide an effective military protection to Genoa, and left room for French intervention in northern Italy. In this context, opposition to the extent of the Spanish alliance, if not to the Spanish alliance as such, became more widespread. And it was based on a particular Republican ideal, based on the unity of its ruling class, which was supposed to overcome the differences between Navec and Moor and so on, which was supposed to follow virtue and to build a strong state more independent from private interests, and which would have also a more powerful army and navy, most of all. These ideas did not just lead to pamphlets and debates, but also influenced policy. During this time, the Republic of Genoa actually actually had a more independent foreign policy. At a certain point, there was a serious diplomatic crisis with Spain itself over Finale, and had also a phase of institutional and naval experimentation with three joint stock companies. The first one, the Compagnia di Nostra Signora della Libertà, which managed the galleys, and then two joint stock companies of trade, the Genoese East India Company, the San Giorgio Maritime Company. And then there was also a new naval squadron made of galleons. In order to describe what was going on and what was the reasoning behind it, I will refer to first of all, three authors, and also some archival documents from this period. The three authors I will specifically refer to are Giovanni Bernardo Veneroso, which has already been mentioned, and then Tobia Pallavicino and Gaspare Squarciafico. all these works that I mentioned were written exactly in the moment of at the high point of navalismo, between the 1640s and the 1650s. And in particular, Veneroso specifically was personally involved in all these processes. For example, he was one of the directors of the last joint stock company, the Compagnia Marittima di San Giorgio, and he was also a shareholder of the previous company, and also of the galley company. So all these people admired the Dutch for their commercial and naval power. They were all people who wanted to improve Genoese trade in order to have a stronger war fleet. As Pallavicino put it, I say that sea trade provides an opportunity to exercise bravery in peacetime, because the sea trade is as much a war training as commerce. The reasoning is that trade improves naval destruction, train sailors, and that merchants could easily turn into corsairs and replicate the trading and military success of medieval Genoa. In this perspective, the Dutch look like a good model, as they combine military success and economic success. Veneroso stresses the fact that the Dutch Republic started as a group of refugee rebels who, by engaging in navigation, became one of the wonder of Europe. And Pallavicino said that never from such a humble beginning you have such a wide, large progress. The Dutch live in barren land and sandlands without anything, and now, because of their navigation, they have abundance of everything and distribute all kinds of precious goods to the rest of Europe. However, we have to remember that this objective was based on a republican ideal of a state populated by good citizens. And accordingly, Pallavicino inserted also this element in the equation and praised the Dutch as citizens as well. As he put it, Holland has the reputation of having the wisest politicians in the world, and this happens because the largest part of its inhabitants engage in trade, and the exercise of trade is what brings them to have sounder policies. So trade and war create good citizens. And of course, the Republicisti, as it is well known, did not just refer to foreign countries, but also to their own Genoese medieval past. And imitating the Dutch was actually a way not just to get to imitate the situation of the Dutch now, but also to get back to the condition of medieval Genoa. As in this passage, Classifico says, we should have a company with many shareholders, just the way they do in Holland and England, and this way we'll get experienced captains and soldiers, and our nation will regain its former glory. There was then a kind of republican model, which was identified in the Netherlands and which was founded on these three pillars: military success, economic success in trade, and political virtue, and which was proposed as a prospective future for Genoa itself. The two states were perceived as comparable, so much so that actually one of them was considered as a model to be copied. This admiration was also supposed to lead to better relations. Another Republicista, Ugo Fieschi, he was a director of the two joint stock companies of trade, the Genoese East India Company and the San Giorgio Maritime Company, and he was also heavily involved in the construction of the galleon fleet. And this guy, Ugo Fieschi, at a certain point stated that the Dutch and the English political situation was similar to Genoa. This speech was made in 1652, so England at the time was a republic under Cromwell. And that therefore the two states should collaborate. As he said, these two countries, the republics of England and Holland, have a regime which is similar and friendly to our own, with laws according to it, and therefore it can guarantee conformity, similarity of attitudes, and stable and a safe agreement, friendship. Now, in case you're wondering, this sentence was written just a few months before the start of the First Anglo-Dutch War. And actually, Fieschi knew that the situation was the way it was, and actually hoped that the Genoa could mediate between the two other republics. Now, of course, the idea of a grand alliance between the republics was not a realistic perspective. However, the point is that the Republicisti actually sought and needed to have better relations with the Dutch because, for example, they needed to import ships, human capital. The best known case, and human capital. The best known case, of course, is the Genoese East India Company, which was based on Dutch human capital. It had Dutch ships manned by Dutch sailors and so on, and which was also eventually stopped by the Dutch East India Company. Let's say, more successful example is the Galleon fleet. The first squadron of galleons that Genoa got was bought in the Netherlands, and in the beginning they actually used a lot of Dutch sailors. And also in the later years, they imported a lot of ships and naval material. So this kind of rhetoric was deployed to promote this policies of a closer relations with the Dutch. An interesting point is that this rhetorics could also be used from the other side. In 1653, there was actually a diplomatic quarrel between Genoa and the Netherlands because two of the ships that the Genoese had bought were sequestered by the Dutch States General for their use during the Anglo-Dutch War. The Dutch paid for it, but asked to give the money by installments without interest. And they justified this request as saying that, let's say, out of Republican solidarity, by saying that, yeah, usually a republic should not pay interest to another fellow republic. Here it didn't work because the Genoese eventually didn't give up and eventually got the money with interest. And of course, there are also limits to this Dutch model. All these people who praise the Dutch don't actually give much factual information, and in some cases also make some clear misunderstandings. We're going to see an instance later. In particular, one of the many things about which Genoese people get confused is the differences between all the different provinces. There are many examples. Here I put a document from the Università in which the Genoese health authorities complain that it's difficult to get reliable information on the health situation in the Netherlands, in the Low Countries, because there are so many provinces, so many different ones, that it's difficult to get reliable information on all of them. This issue leads me to the heart of the matter and also to the end of my talk. Already Spinola had made the link between Dutch and companies. This is an element which is also present in later Republicisti, who propose time and again to establish a trading company and eventually actually manage to do so, and who point to the Dutch companies as a proof of their potential. When the Genoese actually refer to companies, to joint stock companies, they describe something whose ownership structure is somewhat familiar. As some scholars, such as Carlo Taviani, for example, pointed out, because that's how the Casa di San Giorgio works, after all, with shares that can be traded, and the governance which is legally distinguished from the state. As a projector put it, he says, I propose to make a company such as the Dutch ones with the shape of the Casa di San Giorgio. Here, Compagnia di San Giorgio refers to the Casa di San Giorgio. It's this document is from 1638, so it's long before the San Giorgio Maritime Company. it's speaking about the fact that we should have a company like the Dutch ones, and it's made like the Castle St. George. What is new in Genoa is that this model is applied to a trading company. And what is so special about them? Veneroso says it quite explicitly. The Dutch, with the money of the merchants and no expenses for the United Provinces, they increased the public and private revenues and conquered new lands as they did in Africa, Indies, and so on. And they did so through two companies in which private people put as much money as they want, build the armies accordingly, and that's how they managed trade in India, in Africa, and in many other places. By the way, this is one of the instances in which the Navalisti get the situation wrong, because Dutch trade in the Mediterranean is not organized as a joint stock company. There is an organization that oversees trade, the Directie van de Levantenhandel, but that's more something like a board of trade, which organizes convoy, but then there are merchants proceed on their own. So a company pursues private and public benefits at the same time. And as another projector, this is the same project of before from 1638, as another projector says, when the company operates, it brings glory to the whole republic. As he says, if we make a company, there would be greatest reputation, because in any case it will be managed by Genoese people, and this is how it works also with the Dutch companies that brings glory, whose successes, whose glory is ascribed to the Dutch, even though it's a private thing. So it operates with the private forces who operate outside the public framework. This is a particularly important point, as the Republic of Genoa needed to build a large consensus to enact policies, and this had actually prevented the Republicisti from taking the forms they wanted, even when they were in power. If you start another institution on a voluntary basis, the company, you can use it as a sort of alternative republic to pursue different political ideas. To push a bit the argument, it's like having something like having something as the Casa di San Giorgio, a state within the state, as so many people put it, in which this element is not a bug, it's a feature. And it's something that the Genoese, it's an element that the Genoese are able to identify in the Dutch India companies, because they know how it works, and so they're able to think of importing it in the Genoese context. So the Dutch are not just an abstract model of Republican virtue and success, but they also appear to have an institution which can be applied in Genoa. Eventually, of course, the importation of this model doesn't work. There are many issues that they have to cope with. Partly there's a lack of human capital, for example, in the case of the Genoese East India Company, and partly also organizational problems of managing the company with the San Giorgio Maritime Company. Basically, the Genoese have problems in monitoring and coordinate the employees of a large company. And eventually, of course, after the 1660s, Republicanismo stops being a powerful force in Genoese politics in any case. In conclusion, the Dutch carry out a specific function within the Genoese political debate, as they embody a certain image of the Republic that some people want to build, and a specific proposal that is widely considered and discussed. Sure, it is a very partial image, but this is valid for every political use of the image of a particular country. And in the end, it tells us more about the people who created the image than about the people who were depicted by it. And this is my conclusion. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. Very, very interesting paper. Another really interesting paper which deals with something that we have not touched so far. So the relationship with another republic, which becomes not an anti-model, but a real model, a concrete model, especially for the trade, for the economic, for trade and naval power. And you explained very well how these Dutch companies were useful to the Republicisti in Genoa to project a new political wave, a new idea of the Repubblica. And of course, it's very interesting because in this time there are very difficult relationship with Spain. So recalling the Dutch model is also a way to differ from that old politician, the Vecchi and the pro-Spanish party. Very interesting. Also very interesting, I found in the very end of your talk, the quotation from Veneroso, and this idea, which was already yesterday we already focused on that, the idea of a Republican empire, the model of the Dutch Republic over the sea, over the European country in India and over the sea, with an empire which is constituted by some other countries useful for the Republic to enrich itself. And this is very interesting because these two papers recall somehow what we have already discussed yesterday, pointing out two very, very interesting concepts, that of liberty, for example, in Wouter's talk, which is central to our program. And liberty has independence from the other countries. For Genoa and in Georgios, I think that this idea of Republican empire based on naval power, on this international trade, which enriched the Republic, I think they are these two are really key concepts for understanding Genoa's early modern republicanism. I have a lot of questions, a lot of things to do, but to say, but of course it's better to open now the discussion.